Hi guys, welcome to my kitchen. I'm going to be making today fermented salsa, and if there's time, also fermented sauerkraut. So those are kind of a couple of the most popular that people might eat anyway. And I've had a couple people request the salsa. It's super simple, so hopefully it will just take us a few minutes here. I did want to show you. I already cut up the tomatoes. I've got 4 small tomatoes in here. Would probably be better with plum tomatoes, but I couldn't find any in the store this time of year. So they're just regular tomatoes. And I wanted to show you cutting up a couple things. I have 1 jalapeno here. An easy way to do this is to slice down the middle. If you like really spicy, you can leave the seeds in. I'm not a big fan of spicy, so I'm going to just cut those out. Just a little diagonal cut. I'm sorry, I'm going to do it over the sink so that I don't drop seeds everywhere. So basically, all I'm going to do is cut up these vegetables and throw them into the food processor. If you don't have a food processor, that's fine. You can just cut them up by hand. Cut them up really small. If you like chunky salsa, you can cut them up a little bigger. That's pretty much up to you. I do like the food processor because it just makes it a little bit easier. Instead of having to chop them up fine, you just throw them in there. So there it is without the seeds. And I'm just going to chop these fairly coarsely, and then the food processor will do the rest. Throw those in. Okay, 1 more. If you are sensitive to the oils in the jalapeno, you can wear rubber gloves. Some people do that. You definitely do not want to rub your eyes after cutting this. And you can use other peppers too. If you like even more spicy, you could use, habanero or anything really. I've got a couple of green onions here. Again, I'm just going to coarsely chop them. They don't have to be perfect. Just enough to get them in the food processor so it can do the rest. I did want to mention while I'm cutting too, something that I actually just learned after I made my probiotics video, and that is people with candida should not eat fermented foods. So if that's a concern that you have, and I did link a video that you can check yourself to see if that is something that you have. So it's a gal that I just found on YouTube, and from what I've been listening to, she sounds very knowledgeable, so you can check that out if you think you might have a concern there. So, other than that, probiotics should be pretty much safe for just about everybody else, but candida people, beware of the fermented foods. I believe you can still take probiotics if you have candida, just not ferments. And I'm actually going to throw the stems in too because they have good flavor and they chop up pretty well for cilantro. And because I don't have very much cilantro, so I'm going to use what I have. Okay, so there's a bunch of cilantro. Now, you can pretty much adjust any salsa recipe that you want to fermenting. So if you have one that's your favorite, go ahead and use that, and I'll show you in a minute here the fermenting part that's important. I have 1 onion. I'm also going to just roughly chop that. Kind of hard to chop and not turn my back to you guys, so sorry about that. Alright, now normally I would be a little more careful, but since the food processor is doing it, I'm just throwing it in there. Doesn't have to be pretty. Okay, one other thought that I had that did not make it into my last video. A good time to take probiotics is in the evening. If you take them right before bed, that gives them all night to kind of settle in and start to populate your gut, so that when you get up in the morning, then you have them ready to go to digest your breakfast. So just a little side note there. That one's for free. Alright, so we'll get this onion in. We got cilantro, tomatoes. Almost done. This is super fast. I'll bring this over here a little closer. Okay, I've got 4 garlic cloves. And I like to use a garlic press because it's super fast. So once I get this garlic in here and we chop it up, the next thing that we're going to add is this whey. It's very pretty. And you might be wondering where on earth you're going to find whey, because it's not something you typically just buy at the grocery store. Whey, actually, I get mine from yogurt. So I make my own yogurt, and then I put it in a jelly bag, or you can use like a loose weave dish towel or something like that, and then the whey drips out, and and your yogurt then is like Greek yogurt. It's more thick. So if you don't have a way to make your own, or you haven't learned how, I might, if you want a video on that, I could do that. Just comment below and let me know if you're interested in learning to make yogurt. But you can also buy a good quality yogurt like Nancy's, and then once you've opened it and used a little bit, oh, that's tough. Once you've opened it and used a little bit, the whey will just naturally separate. So you can just drain that off and use that. I kind of found that I wasn't getting enough whey out of the store-bought yogurts. So that's one reason I try to make my own, and because the homemade yogurt's healthier. So, but what the whey is going to do for you is act as like a preservative until your beneficial bacteria start to work. And I'll talk about that in just 1 second here. So now I'm just going to chop this up, and I will probably... Oh, almost forgot the spices. Okay. So I have spices, and this is just what my recipe was. This is actually... hang on just 1 second, and I will wash my hands, and then I can show you. Okay, so what I did for this salsa recipe, I had a salsa recipe that I just really loved. That's just a fresh salsa recipe. And then I have Nourishing Traditions. This is an excellent book. It's got lots of fermenting recipes and just lots of information. It's got all of these sidebars are full of information about traditional methods of preparing food and just healthy ways to make food. So this basically has taught me how to ferment the salsa, and then I took my recipe that I liked and I modified this to make it fit. So so the seasonings in here, if you were looking at this book, are not going to excuse me, the jalapeno. The seasonings are not going to match because I kind of modified it. And that's okay. You can modify any of this, any of the ingredients, any of the seasonings. The only thing that is crucial is the fermenting part, and we'll get to that. So first off, I have my seasonings that I used: a teaspoon of cumin, half a teaspoon of salt, and a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne. They're going in here, and that's the pink Himalayan salt. And then it calls for 2 teaspoons of lemon, which actually this book called for the juice of 2 lemons, which is a little bit lemony for me. I didn't want it to be quite so lemony, so I used lime because I didn't happen to have any lemon juice, and I figured it would fit with kind of the Mexican flavor. And then 2 teaspoons of olive oil, so that's going in there too. Okay, so my camera cut me off there, and you missed the important part, which is the whey. So I added 1/4 cup of whey into this. Whey is actually what's going to act as a preservative. It has lactic acid, which is the preservative part. Lactic acid is also what the beneficial bacteria produce as they are feeding off of the food. So that is the part that preserves the food and what makes it fermented. So by putting whey in it, this is going to preserve the vegetables until the probiotics start reproducing and producing their own lactic acid, so it doesn't spoil while you're waiting for them to go. So I put that in there. All I'm going to do now is pulse this and chop it up. Now for those of you that tried my salsa before, this is probably going to be a little different because I didn't write down exactly what I did last time I made it, so sorry. This might be maybe a little less tomatoey. It doesn't look like it has. So I can always go back and add a few more tomatoes, which I might do a little later after I stop filming, if I want it to be more tomatoey, but here's what it looks like right now. And you know, with store-bought tomatoes, they're not going to look quite as fresh and wonderful. That does bring me to another point though, while I'm pouring this into the jar, hoping this will fit in a quart jar. I did want to mention though that when you are fermenting, it is important to use organic produce, because the thing that is causing the fermentation is those beneficial bacteria that get onto the food from the soil, and if your food has been sprayed with pesticides and things, it's going to kill those beneficial bacteria, and you won't really have much to you won't have much there to ferment. So organic produce is important when you are fermenting. It's good to do all the time, but especially when you're fermenting. Okay, so this does not look very tomatoey, does it? That's okay. And you know, you can taste it at this point too. I mean, it's just a fresh salsa right now, so you can take a little taste, and I think I might do that to see if it needs more salt or more tomatoes or anything like that. Of course, it's going to be better once the flavors have melded a little bit. It's a little oniony, but it's pretty good. Okay. So I'm going to just pack this into a quart-sized jar. I'm going to use this little pounder to get it packed down there. What you really want is all of the, sorry, I'm probably chewing in your ear. You want all of the vegetables to be below the surface of the liquids, because anything sticking up is of course not protected by that lactic acid, and it can mold. So I'm just gonna squeeze off the juice here. So I don't want it completely to the top of the jar. I'm gonna take a little bit out so it fits a little better. Ideally, you would have a weight to push down on this and keep it under the liquid. I don't have a weight, so I'm going to use a cabbage leaf. It's a little trick I've learned recently. So I'm just going to take this leaf here and try to kind of fit it in. And this will kind of push down the vegetables and keep them underneath the fluids, like that. So you can see maybe you can see, I'm not sure. So that's just going to keep those all down there. And you can also add a little bit of water if there's not enough liquid coming off of your tomatoes or in your whey. So all I'm going to do now is put a lid on this, which I didn't get out beforehand, but I'll put a lid on this and set it on the counter for 2 or 3 days, and then it's done and I put it in the fridge and it will keep for a good 6 months. So that is it. Cool, dark place on the counter, so I just kind of put it to the back of the counter. I label it with a little piece of tape so I know when it's done, and that's it. We are done. Salsa is completely made. So now we're going to make sauerkraut. I have already cut up most of a head of cabbage, just sliced into little slivers. So I'm just going to show you a couple different techniques that you can use. Okay, so let's try this. So I've got a quarter of a head. I just cut it into fourths, and now I'm going to cut off the core end. Just at an angle there. Now there's a couple different ways that you can do this. One is to just put it into a food processor. That would be the easiest, but I just made salsa in my food processor, so I'm going to cut it by hand. So you can just do this, make really thin little slivers. Hopefully you can see that. Another method is to take off a section of the outer leaves. Oops, they're sticking. So you just take off a section and then lay them flat, and that way you can slice them really easily. Slice them into little slivers. So one other thing as I'm slicing this that I wanted to make sure I emphasized, and I do not recall if I did emphasize it enough in the last probiotics video, but probiotics can only survive, you know, they're kind of delicate. So things like your stomach acid will kill them off, so it's best to take probiotics apart from food. Now we're making food with probiotics in it, so obviously you're going to be eating that probably with a meal. So some of them will survive and get where they need to get, but you don't want to, say, heat them. You don't want to cook with probiotic foods because the heat will kill them. You want to store them in the refrigerator once they're done fermenting, because that will slow down the fermentation process. Refrigerator or a cool place. You know, in the old days they would use a root cellar, but you know, not too many people have that anymore. So just keep them in a cool place or a refrigerator, and then eat them cold, or if you want to put them with your food, warm the food up first and then cool it to a temperature that you can eat. You know, you don't want to throw it into boiling water or something. And then once your food has cooled off enough to be tolerable, then you can go ahead and put your probiotics in. So almost done. I might just put this together. Okay. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. If you don't have whey that I talked about with the salsa, you can just use salt. You don't have to have whey to ferment foods. So there are a lot of different recipes out there you can look up online or Pinterest, or different ways you can get fermented recipes, and it seems like everybody uses different amounts of salt. So if you use less whey, you're going to need more salt, because you still need the preservative to keep the food from rotting until it starts to ferment. So, so extra salt if you eliminate the whey. And I could not tell you the exact proportions of that. I kind of looked up in my ball canning book for sauerkraut, and it just had 50 pounds of cabbage and a pound of salt. So I guess it would be a 1-to-5 ratio by weight. But I'm going to still use whey for this. First, though, before I put the whey in, I've got my cabbage all cut up. I'm going to sprinkle my salt, and this is just 1 tablespoon. Let me double check. Yes, 1 tablespoon of pink Himalayan sea salt. And I'm going to mix that in with the cabbage, and I'm going to just let this sit for quite a while. I'll probably go eat my lunch and then, you know, let this sit, because what that's going to do is draw the juices out of the cabbage. So I'm going to mix that in really good, and then I'll just leave it for a while, and we'll be back in a little while to see how it's going. Okay, I took a little break, ate a little lunch, and the cabbage is starting to wilt from the salt. That means the juices are starting to come out. So now what we're going to do is bruise the cabbage, and that's going to bring out the juices. So I like to use my hands and just, I don't know if you can see what I'm doing, I'm basically just squeezing it. Squeezing it, you can pound it, you can use one of these guys. This one's kind of small, but you could use a bigger one and pound on it like this. So you're going to just bruise it really good till you start to see juice coming out. And it does take a little while. So I might edit this part out and go ahead and bruise it and come back. It can take a good 10 minutes or so to get all that juice out. So I'm going to go ahead and bruise this, and I will be back in a moment. So I got all my cabbage crushed up, if you can see that. It's, you know, super wilty now, so I just kept squeezing it and pounding it until it was all completely bruised. And all this liquid came out. I'm going to go ahead and drain it so you can see all the liquid. See just how much came out of this cabbage. So there is a lot of liquid in a cabbage. And especially if you can pick it fresh right from the garden, those ones can be so juicy. Okay, so all of that liquid, how much is that? Like half a cup maybe? Let's see if you can tell. So almost a full cup of liquid came out of that. So I'm going to add to that a quarter of a cup of whey. If you don't have whey, you just would have added an extra tablespoon of salt. So it would be 2 tablespoons of salt. If you don't have whey, I had whey, so I did 1 tablespoon of salt and a quarter of a cup of whey, right? Yes, quarter of a cup of whey. Okay, now I'm just going to pack my cabbage into the jar. And hopefully not make too much of a mess. Now so just like with the salsa, you want the liquid to cover the cabbage. So I saved somewhere an extra cabbage leaf to put over the top to keep the actual cabbage down below the liquid level. And it looks like my jar is going to be too big. I wasn't quite sure how much I had here. That's okay. Okay, so now I can use my little meat pounder to pack it down. I'm going to pack it down. If there's not enough liquid to cover, then I'll just add a little bit of filtered water. So I almost could have gotten it into a quart, but not quite. Okay, so once I get it packed down, it looks like it's going to be low enough. Now I'll go ahead and put my cabbage leaf over the top. Ideally, you would want to fill up your jar and have it closer to the top. But that's what I had, so that's what I used. Okay, so this may or may not wedge down in there real well. If you have some kind of weight, you can go get like a rock, a clean, wash it up really good. If you can find a rock that fits into the jar. The purpose of this is to try to keep the cabbage below the level of the liquid, because you do not want it to rot. You want the liquid there to preserve it. And if you do get, like, there's a few little pieces of this leaf sticking up, they could get a little bit of mold on them. You just pull that out and throw it away, and it's not a big deal. So there you have it. I'm going to set this on the counter for 3 days, and then I will put it in the fridge, and that is it. Simple, simple. So hope you guys try this. Hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to thumbs up so other people will know this is worth watching. Share this video if you know anybody that wants to learn this, and if you want to get notifications of videos when I make them, go ahead and subscribe. If you have any other ferments that you want to see me do, go ahead and comment below and I'll see what I can make for you. So thanks for joining me, and happy fermenting!